Hello everyone and welcome to another Versus Video Deck Tech. I am Braun-Duin, joined again by
CDM.
and we are battling with some Magic Origins cards this time around. And we are doing actually a old school battle here, circa
Blast from the past.
I don't know, 2005 maybe, 2004. Yeah. Somewhere around that range. We are doing Goblins versus Elves. So there are a lot of playable Goblins and Elves in Magic Origins, and we are going to be battling with those respective tribes, and I'm on the Goblin side of things, so let's go ahead and dive in. Basically, the biggest addition that Goblins got in this set is Goblin Piledriver. And Goblin Piledriver, if you've ever played Legacy, or at least played it 4 years ago, was a very powerful card in the format, and it just is impressive how much damage that this card can actually do with other Goblins. For example, curving something like Foundry Street Denizen into Goblin Piledriver into Goblin Rabblemaster, your Goblin Piledriver is attacking for 5 on turn 3. It's kind of like how out of control Rabblemaster can get, except it's doubled, but you don't get the Goblin. So it actually just does an absurd amount of damage really fast, and the entire deck is kind of built around the ability of using Goblin Piledriver. So we have every creature in here is a Goblin. And we have Dragon Fodder, which produces goblins. We could also be playing Hordling Outburst, but between Heel Cutter and Rabblemaster and Hordling Outburst, there were too many 3-drops. I ended up cutting Hordling Outburst, which I don't know if that's the right cut. Maybe it's one of these other ones, but that was the one I ended up cutting. And for our 1-drops here, we have Foundry Street Denizen, Goblin Glory Charger, or Chaser, is it? Yeah. And Frenzied Goblin. And Foundry Street Denizen is just very good with cards like Rabblemaster and Dragon Fodder that are producing multiple tokens a turn. Just a really good turn 1 play. It's pretty weak as the game goes on, but it's good on turn 1. And then Goblin Glory Chaser is a new one where it's a 1/1 for 1, and if it connects with your opponent, it gets Renown. So it gets a +1/+1 counter, and then it also has the ability where it has to be blocked by 2 or more creatures, which is a keyword called Menace that they're now bringing. That's basically an ability we've seen on red cards many times in the past. Most notably, Stormblood Berserker, I believe is the name, was back around M11, M12 era, M13. I think it was in M13. Yep. It was a 1/1 Bloodthirst for 2 that couldn't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures, and that ability was extremely powerful and actually much better than you would think. And we're seeing that with Goblin Glory Chaser here as well. So really the idea of the deck is to play a bunch of goblins, and then we can either use our removal spells to clear the way, Wild Slash, Strike, and Stoke, or we can make creatures unblockable, which is our other game plan. We have Heel Cutter and Hammer Hand, which can both make specific creatures unable to block. So if our opponent has a creature that's capable of killing our Piledriver, we can make that creature unable to block, and then hit them for a bunch. Alternatively, though, if our opponent has a bunch of creatures, we can use Subterranean Scout to make one of our specific creatures unblockable. So for Goblin Piledriver, that could end up being 11 damage, or some absurd amount of damage to make unblockable. And it's also very good with Goblin Rabblemaster as well, because Rabblemaster is a 2-power guy, but when he attacks, he becomes huge. Same with Piledriver. So we basically have 2 different aspects of not blocking covered. We have 2 different cards that are great against our opponent only having like a limited number of creatures in play. Then we have 1 card that's great if they have a bunch of creatures in play, just making our guys unblockable and pushing through for lots of damage. And then we have 2 big payoff cards in Piledriver and Rabblemaster to deal a lot of damage.
We also have Frenzied Goblin along the same lines too. That's a repeatable effect.
That is true. We also, Frenzied Goblin plays the same role as Hammerhand and Heel Cutter as well. And then our mana base, we have 4 mountains, 5 mountains, and 11 mountains. So that's pretty spicy mana base, but
perfect numbers.
Yeah, pretty much perfect numbers of that. But anyway, that is the main deck for Goblins. Let's go ahead and look at the sideboard. All right, so here we are with the sideboard, and we've actually dedicated half our sideboard to an interesting sideboard plan. The idea is that we have so many goblins in our main deck that we can actually sideboard into Obelisk of Erd to turn our goblins into giant creatures. Now, this is not something that I like to main deck because I've always found that Obelisk of Erd is really ineffective against a variety of like removal heavy or like sweeper heavy strategies, because it's really hard to want to this card makes you overextend to the board. It's hard to want to overextend to a board that's going to get wrathed. So I found that Obelisk is actually extremely underwhelming in a lot of matchups, but there are some matchups, such as against green decks, where they don't really kill your creatures, they just try to build a better board than you, where Obelisk is actually an extremely powerful card.
Yeah.
And along with that, we can bring in Hordling Outburst, which is great for casting the Convoke of Obelisk and also produces 3/3/3s when we do have an Obelisk in play.
It's pretty good.
So I think that this is actually a really cool transformational sideboard planning in a lot of matchups. I actually have lost to this before in a IQ that I played in where I was playing Green-Red Devotion, and my opponent sided into Obelisk Avert and just savaged me with some 5/5 Goblin tokens when he drew multiples of them. My Dragonlord Tarka was only killing a single Goblin token, so didn't work out too well for me. Past that point, we have Roast, Searing Blood, and Scouring Sands. It's just some removal spells that are situationally good, but not something we want to main deck, and they're going to come in matchups where they're respectively good. So really, that's about it for the Goblins deck. Make sure you stay tuned and watch CVM's Elf deck tech, and then also stay tuned for the battles where we see which tribe will ultimately rise on top.